Welcome to the Zellwood Farmers Forum. It is a thrill to see you. Many of you I have not seen in 20 years.
Yeah.
And there are many people who are not here. Most of the first generation are gone. The Les brothers and Ken Jorgensen, Charlie Grinnell, Billy Long, and others.
Grant Les.
Yeah, all the Les boys, listen to me. They were, weren't they? Anyway, thank you for being here, and we want to honor their memory and talk about the good old days and some of the fun things that happened, a little bit of history. Now, this is a historical society, so I'm going to give you a few minutes of history, and then we'll go into farming. But because of the Eau Claire Canal was put through in 1880 something, I think it was 88, that lowered the level of Lake Apopka. And of course, it supposedly was going to be transportation, but that never came about. I don't think it ever was actually completed for transportation. They wanted, the boats brought supplies to Eustis and even into Lake Eau Claire, Tangerine, and all the little towns, Mount Dora, but they couldn't get into Winter Garden or Winter Garden or Oak Boy. And then a thing came through called the railroad in the 1880s, and that there was no need to, I think, finish the Eau Claire Canal. But that did lower the level of Lake Apopka. And in 1911, there were people who came and tried to farm on the lake. There was a hotel built, Holly Arms Hotel. It was built by Zellwood Farm, and not Zellwyn, but Zellwood is what I read. And they actually ran a bus from Orlando to Zellwood just to bring people to stay in the hotel and to see if they could sell them some land. And I'd sell you some swampland. And the problem is there was no water control. And several tried it, Arthur King being one. And so they failed because they didn't have water control, pump water on or off. And then a guy by the name of Richard Whitney, who just happened to be the youngest president of the New York Stock Exchange, he bought out Zellwood Farms. And he inherited the hotel with it. And because of that, he had a nice hunting lodge, and they would hunt it up on the swampland, or the sawgrass, as it was called. And he formed a Florida Humus Company. They bagged the muck and sold it. And now the cement by Ohio Farmers. Anyone here from Ohio Farmers? No. But Ohio Farmers, all that cement on Jones Avenue, that's where they dried the muck and bagged it and sold it. And but he ended up going to jail. Richard Whitney did, that is, for embezzlement, and that didn't bode too well with his business adventures. And because of that, the people who held the mortgage had to have some money out of this swampland in Zellwood, Florida. And so they, 1941, there was a thing called the Zellwood Drainage District was created by the state legislature. It was paid for, though, by private funds, bonds that the farmers paid off. I think it was Connecticut Mutual held that bond, and they worked on it for a long time. The farmers did, and we finally paid it off. But I have read, in one book, I read that the farmers were given the land. And may I say that was not true. Definitely not true. It was bought, and there were many successful farmers, but there were more failures. And I believe there were over 100 farms 100 farmers who came to try their luck in Zellwood. And Billy, not Billy, Swanson has a book. It was over in the port.
Henry Swanson.
Henry Swanson has a book, Countdown for Agriculture. And in that book, it mentions there were lots of suitcase farmers. They would come in and farm for a day or two, and then they'd have to leave before the season. But I'm rambling now. My 1941 drainage district, Zellwood Drainage District, came into being. It was a legal entity. If you had one acre, one vote, and we hired a drainage district manager, just like the city of Orlando would hire elect a mayor, we would a manager, and he maintained the main roads, main canals, and the main pumps, and kept us. Of course, we were farming below the level of Lake Apopka. There were some successes, there were some failures. And my father, Charles Grinnell Sr., came to Zellwood in 1945 on purpose to farm, and he got a little brochure mailed to him while he was in Europe in World War II, and it talks about Zellwood, and it says that electricity and water are readily available. Big deal. And so he came to Zellwood, and he also got on the bus and went down to a place called Belglade, and the bus literally turned around in Belglade. That was the end of the line. And even though my father was born in Tampa, a native Floridian, he didn't want to live in Belglade. He stayed on the bus and he came back to Zellwood because at least we had a tree and some hills. I've rambled now enough. We have 4 speakers here. Irv Sharpless from Luss Farms, Neil Studoff from Zellwood Farms, David Hill from Long Farms, and a fellow by the name of Mr. Scott. And he isn't really a muck farmer, but we let him be here anyway. And we have Eric Hooper in the audience, who was probably, I would call you the first generation farmer.
He was.
And because you were. And you're the only one I see in the audience that I would call the old farmer. And now Tommy Staley, our county commissioner and general manager for Zellwood Farms, is here. And Neil Studoff, father, Herbert, was the first general manager for Zellwood Farms, Charlie's and Neil's father. And of course, then Tommy, after Herbert passed away, Tommy became the general manager.
And then my whole story.
Became his general manager. So between those 3 men were general managers for Zellwood Farms during their whole
51 years.
51 years of farming. And Charlie Grinnell Sr. bought a 3-row radish harvester from Eric Hooper because that was growing radishes was kind of, I think it was bottom of the earth farming or something. I don't know. Neil, I'll be quiet and give you the mic, okay?
Okay.
And just start talking.
All right. Thank you. I was asked by the Historic Society to come here tonight and speak on behalf of Zellwood Farms and tell the history of this great farming organization that I worked for many years. And I feel really it's a pleasure to be here tonight. And first thing I want to say is that I'm a farmer and I'm not a speaker, but we'll get through this. Starting off in 1947, in February, Zellwood Farms went into business. And at that time, they bought out the Beech Nut Farm, which were Ken and Mr. Stewart, and there was a third partner named Frank Dutton, that they were all there working for Beech Nut. Mr. Stewart was the man who ran the business part of the deal. Ken, of course, was the farmer. I'm not sure about Frank Dutton. I know very little about him. I know he was only there for a couple years. But anyway, Mr. Stewart Frank Dutton bought out Beech Nut Farms and formed a partnership. Ken and Mrs. Stewart they were working for Zellwood before that. And when they started in business, I mean, I remember Ken saying that our 50th anniversary that we'd been in business for 50 years, he said that he and Mrs. Stewart started that business, and between the two of them, they had $50. And I know there was a line of credit that had to be extended, and some of the local business people were willing to go along with them. I know that Wilson Toomer was the fertilizer company that they depended on. Everybody knew Corbin Ballantyne, was a good friend of Ken's. Harry Talley from Leesburg, the Talley Box, extended credit to him. And also there was local business people, and along with the airplane service that we had here at the time was like Johnny Gardner, Carol Potter, and the old barnstormer, I called him, was Pappy Hughes. So my dad started to work for Zellwood Farms 2 months later, in April of 1947. And I guess everybody's seen this picture here, which I had donated the original to the Historic Society. And this was taken in 1947. My dad at that time was probably 29 years old, and Ken was a man of 25. And this truck here was the first truck that they had on the farm. It's got a number on it, A1. And times were tough back in those days, but my dad, he drove this truck from Zellwood to Sanford for 1 year. We lived in Sanford at the time. And it was kind of tough. The second year, they had bought a pickup that they used at the packing house, and he would take this truck and he would leave it at the packing house, and he would get a dry ride home or whatever. But anyway, when Zellwood went in business, they had 4 employees. One was my dad, he was a farm manager. The second man was Raymond Thorson, was the equipment manager and the head of the shop. And there was a fellow here that was a local man by the name, he lived in Zellwood, his family did for a long time, named Ernest Bateman. He was a packing house manager. And then there was a lady from Orlando, that her name was Flo Bartlett. She was the bookkeeper in the office, and that was the 4 employees they had. The crops they grew to start with were, of course, mixed vegetables, but they had 2 major crops. One was corn, and the other was radishes. And I can remember as a small boy going out with my dad, because I worked over there a lot when I was young, and I remember in the radishes, they had a 1-row harvester. And it was like walking behind a lawnmower. And it cut 1 row at a time, and it had a place where the driver could stand and ride on it, and they had your bushel baskets set on the side of it, and that chain would cut the radishes, bring it up, and they'd fill up the basket of radishes, and then they'd set it on the ground. And then the truck would come along, and somebody would pick it up and dump it in the truck, and they'd take it to the packing house. That was a slow go. But by the time I started working there, they had much better machines then than they did back in the early days when they first started growing radishes. Another crop was corn, was the main crop. Zellwood was always a leader in growing corn. We always did things a little bit different than anybody else. We always shed packed our corn. We never did harvest corn and pack it in the field. We always take it to the packing house. And when we first started out, it was a hand-picked job where people just walked down the corn rows picking the corn and throwing it into the back of the truck. That's the way they harvested. And then after a few years went by, they built a machine that had long wings on it. It had a conveyor belt, and the people would walk along pull the corn, put it on a conveyor belt, and it would go up through the main belt and dump onto a truck in the back. And then, of course, as modern times, we had the mechanical harvester, what they call the boots machines. My dad, unfortunately, passed away in September 1959 of a massive heart attack. He was a man of only 41 years old. And at that time, Tommy Staley took over the job as the farm manager at Zellwood Farms. I started to work there in September of 1961. I remember Tommy Staley sent word up to Mount Dora where I lived and told me that Ken was looking for a supervisor. If I was interested in the job, I needed to come down and see him. And I needed the job. The company I was working for, I knew that they weren't going to be in business much longer. I think they were going to be bankrupt. So I needed the job. So I came down and saw Ken and he hired me. And I think that was the same year Bill Kelly came to work for Zellwood also. It was 1961. I think he came a few months before I did, but Bill and I started at the same time. I got off to a good start. I was young, man, just barely 21 years old. They put me in charge of 3 crews as a supervisor at harvesting. Zellwood had about 7, 8 crews at the time, but they gave me 3 best crews they had, and they had experienced crew leaders, and I had been around, and most people knew who I was anyway, so I got off to a good start, and I made it. When I started to work there in '61, and about 4 years later, my brother came along and started working there, Charlie, and we were 9th generation farmers. My family had migrated here, came here from Amsterdam, and they were Dutch, and they settled on Long Island, and they started farming there in the 16th century. And Charlie and I were 9th generation farmers, and sad to say we'd probably be the last. But anyway, my grandfather left from up there, and he came to Sanford in the early 1900s. And that's how we got down, our family got here to Florida. To kind of break this up a little bit, I'd like to tell a little story. There was quite a bit of written in here about dragline operators that worked on the Muck. And I wonder, is there any dragline workers here that had worked on the Muck any time? I know I saw a list of names, but anyway, to make a long story short, I was looking through the names and I came across this this name of Tillman Smith. I looked at that and I didn't know who exactly he was, but as I read below that, I saw that he'd worked for the Drainage District from 1945 to 1968, I think. And I knew Tillman, but that's not what we called him. His name was Ferdinand. It's T.F. Smith. And I think everybody just ended up calling him Smith. But anyway, I remember Bill Kelly had a little comment to make about him and said he was a man that had a good sense of humor. Well, he did have that, but that's kind of like an understatement. This guy, he was always like to play little pranks on you. So one day, I was lickety-splitting down the main road. I just got a brand new pickup from Zellwood Farms, nice white brand new pickup. In the Drainage District, they always clean the main road ditches. They clean it from the inside, and they would just dip out the muck and flip it out in the fields, you know. So I seen Smith sitting there in that drag line. Here I am tailing it down the road, and he's sitting there. And when I got just so close, he pulled that bucket up and slung that mud right out over the middle of the road. And here I go trying to roll my window up because we didn't have air conditioning, and I went through that pile of mud and it just covered my truck. And he was sitting in there just laughing like the devil. And I think I just slowed down and I think I just gave him the finger and kept on going. But he was a character. I enjoyed that. He knew my dad because they'd worked together down there for quite a few years. At that time in the 60s, Zellwood was growing very fast. They had pretty much, they had moved out of Unit 1 and started buying up land in Unit 2. And a lot of things Zellwood made a huge move in the 60s. They, right after I got there, they built a new packing facility over on the railroad tracks. We used to, all our offices and everything was over in, it was a building there on the railroad that belonged to the railroad. It was a shed there. But we built a brand new office, new packing house, shipping, and a radish house we built in that facility. We did that in the early 60s. We had some weather issues in the 60s. One, we had the killing freeze in the year of 61 and 62. It was the winter of 61 and 62. I'm not real sure. It was probably 62 because usually that's when the weather was bad. But we lost most everything we had, and we were just basically out of business for a couple of months. I guess the first thing we probably had when we started back was radishes, because that was the quickest crop you could jump back in. But then it came along in 1964, right after we built this new packing house, we had a tornado that came through there and tore that place to pieces. It ripped up the whole packing house from the concrete pillars, right, and just scattered it all the way over to the Harley Arms Hotel. And it just was so happened that it happened during the lunch break, and thank goodness all the people that worked there were out, either gone to lunch or sitting out in their cars, and we had practically no injuries at all. But we lost that whole shed and we had to rebuild everything. And I think Luss Farms, we had radishes, and this was in April, I think. And we had Grant and his company, they ran a lot of radishes for us, helped us out on that deal. And then in the 1968 was the wettest corn season that we ever had. I mean, it rained every day. And it was got to me, at the time we came to a standstill. We just couldn't do anything else. The corn was standing in water and everything we had was buried. And Ken came out there that day and he says, let's throw the towel in, we're gonna quit. And I think we had a couple hundred acres left, but the corn stood in water so long it was wilting, and it was just, quality would never be any good anyway. So he said, just throw the towel in and we quit. So we went up to the office that afternoon and he says, hey, let's just all go up to the Rudo. So we all cut out for the Rudo. So anyway, in the early 60s, Zellwood had a salesman that came from California. His name was Slim Howlett. I don't know if anybody knows or remembers Slim, but he worked there for many years. Mm-hmm. And he taught Ken into growing 20 acres of carrots. And that was the beginning of the carrot deal in Zellwood. And we grew those carrots and we harvested them by hand. We had a subsoiler that would lift the carrots up, and then we'd had people go out there and they'd pick and cut the tops off and put them in bushel baskets. That's how we paid them so much a bushel. So that was the beginning of the carrot deal. And then also in 1960, they purchased the sand farm, 1,500 acres of sand farm. This was in the later 50s. And it gave us it opened up a big window for us, because it gave us, on the sand land, it was a lot warmer than it was down in the muck. So we could grow some of our vegetable crops over there in the wintertime, but the big deal was it gave us more diversification. And we would grow like crops like cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli, and some vine crops, some squash. I don't remember, a lot of other little small crops I can't remember right off the top of my head. But it opened up the windows for us, and it took us about 2 or 3 years to develop the whole farm, but we started farming, you know, within a year after we bought it. In the 70s and 80s, carrots become a major crop in Zellwood, and we built a new carrot packing house, the state of the art at that time. It was, we had some hand baggers, but then we had a lot of machinery too, automatic baggers, and also the radish house was also taken over there, and they were together. And Raymond Thorson at that time built the first carrot harvester in Zellwood. Raymond was a really kind of like a genius in building equipment. He built most all of the equipment for Zellwood Farms that we built for our own personal use. He was involved in all of that. In the late 70s and 80s, we started having a problem out on the farms with soil compaction. It got real bad over the years, especially Unit 1 that had been farmed the longest and the hardest. And back in the days when we had D4 Caterpillars, up to the time we were driving 250 horsepower big tractors over that, pulling rollers and everything, the soil just compaction. So we had to change our cultural practices at that time, which meant that we had to, before that, we planted everything on the flat. Where the water would stand, it wouldn't percolate down. And of course it was very bad. This flat land was bad for windstorms, which we had some bad windstorms, especially in the month of March and parts of April. I know people that lived here in Zellwood and Apopka and everywhere else didn't like to see March come around because half the farm would be down the road about 10 to 15 miles. But anyway, we changed that and we started planting. Most all our crops were on beds. We had to change that. And Raymond there built some big equipment, some big planters, especially radish planter, not radish planter, but carrot planter and leaf planters. And we had to split our fields in half, get more lateral ditches so we could get better drainage. It was a huge project. It took many years to go through that farm we had. And then we bought a laser plane, which was really one of the biggest, a piece of equipment we really needed bad. It really made a big difference on that farm because we farmed Zellwood farmed their land hard. And I'm telling you, they'd grow 3 major crops in 1 year on that land. It'd have like a fall leaf crop, a carrot crop in the wintertime, and then a corn crop in the springtime. And if they could find 30 days where they needed, they'd stick a radish crop in there. So they didn't even lay fallow very long around that place. But anyway, the laser plane really improved the land, made it pool top level. I know most of you other guys, eventually they all had laser planes too. But, and another thing we did at the time was when we built the sand farm, we had greenhouses over there and we started transplanting all our spring leaf stuff, which you take a 6-week-old plant and put it in the field, it had a lot better chance of surviving the windstorms than a little seedling came up. And it was very successful. Some of these pictures right here is witness to all that. Now Now, I'm getting conflicting reports on this, and I'm not really, I know Mr. Stewart retired at the age of 77. His son's sitting right here in front of me. Get some information from him tonight. And Ken Jorgensen becomes the owner of Zellwood Farms. I'd like to say a couple words about Mr. Stewart because, I'll tell you what, he was a great man. He was an employee's really person. And he always was asking about how's your family, and he was always concerned about his employees. And I remember after Mr. Stewart retired, he would still come down to that farm every Wednesday afternoon. And he would start out, he'd go in there and see Mac Staley, which was the comptroller of Zellwood Farms at that time. He'd get the information from him that he wanted. Then he'd go to the sales department and he'd go in there and talk to the sales guys, and he'd find out what the prices were on everything. And then he'd come down the hall looking for either Tommy and I, and he was wanting to know how many crates of this and that we were going to have for the week. And then he would leave and he'd go home and figure it all out, what we were going to do. And I know Ken, when Mr. Stewart passed away, I know Ken made the comment that when he passed away, he was still figuring. But he loved Zellwood Farms, and it was his whole life. In the 80s, we had 3 major freezes, 83, 85, and 89, and they were all devastating. We lost everything, all 3 of those years. The only difference is, the earlier they came, the better off it was, gives you more time to recover. But 83 was, I remember that happened, came on Christmas Eve. And then the one in 89, I remember it snowed. Because I remember going down the farm the next morning, there was snow just banked up against the beds. That's the first time I'd ever seen it snow in Florida in my life. Tommy Staley, I'm not real sure when the year Tommy retired. Was it around 1990? 88. 88, okay. And then at that time, I became the farm manager at Zellwood Farms. The 90s, well, we had some good farming years in the early 90s, but as we knew what was coming, everybody played it fairly close to the vest because the time was getting short. In closing, I'd like to say something about my other employee, Ken Jorgensen, which was, he was Zellwood Farms. He was called the Dean of the Zellwood Farmers. Zellwood Farms was one of the top 100 farming organizations in the United States. At one time, I think we were ranked number 25. We would grow 10,000 acres of crop on 5,000 acres of land every year. Ken's accomplishments are too many to mention, but a few that I know about was one of the big things that was the vacuum cooling that he introduced in the 60s was a much better cooling system than the hydro cooling that we used to use. He made the mixed farming vegetable business, the thing that we had was a lot of variety, and the truck could come there and he could get 15, 20 items of vegetables at one place, you know. You didn't have to travel all over Central Florida. But through being diversified, through Ken's guidance, we had the luxury of having the mixed vegetables there. Carrot House, and that he built was another one was a great achievement for Zellwood Farms. And I remember back when he went up the coast somewhere and bought a corn line that we put in our packing house when we built on the other side of I call it the other side of the tracks. But anyway, he went up there, he and Raymond, I think, went up there and they bought this, actually was a broccoli line, a packing broccoli line. They went up there and they bought that thing, and in the summertime we sent about 5 or 6 mechanics up there and dismantled that thing and brought it back down to Florida on a flatbed train car and assembled it there, and it was one of the most productive packing lines I think I've ever seen. I ran that thing for 20 years, so you could pack like 15, 20,000 crates a day of corn in that place. Very efficient. Ken was not a man that was afraid to stick his neck out either. I think one of the biggest decisions that he ever made and accomplishments was actually happened after the buyout happened. And that's when Zellwood moved their operation to Georgia and built a state-of-the-art carrot house up there. That amazed me because the fact is that we never grew we never grew any carrots up there before. We were new. But we built this carrot house up there, and we went up there and we made it work. But people from Boathouse and Grimway, the two largest carrot growers in the United States, from California, between the two of those guys, they grew about 70,000 acres of carrots. They both came through that house and they both made the comments that it was the most ultra-modern cello packing house in the United States. And Ken did that without we never grew the first. The only sad thing about it was that he never got to see the first carrot run through that house. But he was always looking forward ahead for anything that Zellwood Farms needed. And he was a man of great respect. He was a past president of the Florida Fruit and Vegetable, and he was inducted into the Florida Agricultural Hall of Fame. Ken's whole life was Zellwood Farms. Thank you. I've enjoyed this, and want to thank the Historic Society for inviting me to do this, and it's a great time. Thank you very much.
Herb Sharpless.
Thank you. I'll try not to overbear you with comments and things, but one comment I'd like to say in Neil's presentation to you is about Mr. Jurgensen. I remember when the dike broke. Eric Cooper's here and probably will know about that. Over on Clarence's side in with Les Farms, we're in Unit 2. Zellwood Farms is Unit 1. But Ken brought all his crew over and helped us plug that dike. And I remember one time on the dike, I don't know who was operating a drag line, but the drag line ran out of gas. And that was very critical because that dike was just like this. And so they ran and got more gas for us. And we finally got that dike plugged off by using bales of straw, and tires weren't doing good. You throw them in there, they'd come right out the other side. But we finally got enough bales of hay in there to stop that. That was very critical then. I don't remember what time of the year it was, but I kind of think it was maybe in the winter time. I'm not sure. You know about that, Neil?
No, I don't think I was there.
You don't know about that? Okay, well, my experience of coming in Florida was in 1955. I had the idea of coming to Florida and growing white radishes. So I flew down here with 20 pounds in my suitcase. And when I got down here, we had 12 inches of rain. My intent was to get those radishes planted, go home, get married, and come down here. Well, I had to wait a while to find some land. It was dry, so I did find some land that Clarence Welling had on the big canal there, and found some area there we could plant those radishes. Well, back then with radishes, with white radishes especially, you had to top them by hand. So I remember going up to Letzinger's and buying some used crates and picking those radishes and hauling them up to Ohio to the Burma farms, and they packed them for us. But from the time that I got to Florida, things changed quite rapidly. With farmers starting to grow sweet corn, more of it. Back in the days of DDT, we would load those airplanes up, and that DDT would fly all over us, and we kept the worms out. Well, finally, a time came when DDT wasn't affecting the worms very much. We had to go something stronger. So I remember in the fields, I never wore any protection, any mask or any clothing or anything back in those days with all the poisons we used. I'm still here. I think my mind's all right. My legs aren't doing so well. But many memories of progression and so forth on the farm. And I will say this, that I think the time had come when Zellwood would not be in the farming business much longer, simply because of the fact of the intrusion of the markets. Sweet corn, for example, they could have sweet corn in Belglade, pick corn in Belglade on a Saturday, move the crews up to Georgia on Monday and start picking there. They didn't need Zellwood at all in their corn. So Georgia has taken over all of that. And some of the crops that we grew, carrots, for example, some of the local chains wouldn't support our crops, our carrots. Publix, I don't think, took the first bag of Florida carrots. Winn-Dixie was good, but Winn-Dixie now is almost a thing of a past, because I think Buy Low Foods has probably bought them out. But I will say that the time came that the buyout was a perfect time for the farmers to get bought out. If they would have waited 10 more years, the farmers would have got half the amount of money they did on the buyout. I think that's, and going back to the situation of the pollution, as we're all blamed for, we spoiled the lake. We didn't do that. So much phosphorus went into the lake, we couldn't control it. So they closed. They didn't pump anymore into the lake for 10 years. And what happened to the phosphorus level? It went up. Who can explain that? Why did the phosphorus level go up? And still today, all the history of the water going into Lake Apopka, you have to realize that the land is lower than the lake, and all the water coming off of the highways runs down Lust Road right down into our canals and so forth. And so if we have to farm, what can we do? We have to take that water, we have to pump it out. Pump it out, pump it out. So what else could we do? Well, I'll turn this over to David and Hank, and I'm sure they've got a lot of things to enlighten us on, and thank you.
Hello, I'm David Hill. I feel like a young guy for about the first time in a long time. The reason I'm sitting here, I guess I'm representing my father-in-law, Billy Long. He passed away in December, but he was one of what I call the kings of the muck, best farmer I ever knew.
Ryan is here.
I wasn't a ninth generation farmer. I married into a farming family. And now I've spawned on some more farmers, so it's, I'm doing my part. But a little bit about Billy. He's from the Eastern Shore, from a farming family, of course. And he came down in the early 50s, and he had an Uncle George that had 20 acres on the muck. And Billy always fantasized about being down here and how he was the utopia farmer. So he came down and rented 20 acres from Uncle George. Long, Uncle George Long, yeah, and that's what started it all. He had some tough times. Things were different then. I know he went. That was about 51, 52, probably in 53 or so. I've heard the story, and all I can do is relate stories because I'm not quite old enough to have been back then. But back in the early 50s, Billy tried his hand down in Muck. And that was the thing to do, was to get bigger, branch out. He went down, leveraged everything, and he got real close, about to harvest corn down there, and the frost came, and he got smoked. Smoked. And he couldn't pay anybody anything. He came back to Zellwood. What year was that? 53, 4, something.
Next year, next season.
Well, I mean, the whole thing was about 53, I think.
Yeah.
And so the next season, he used to always, you didn't gamble around him, you didn't roll dice, you didn't play cards, but that's what he was a gambler. He doubled up in Zellwood, and he hit a lick. And that doesn't come around too often, but he hit a lick. And so he promised everybody in Motley he'd be back, and he made a phone call, said, guys, I'll be back. Need to get so-and-so bar, all 20 of you guys have got money to, and I'll be writing checks. And so he went down there, and he would write a check, then make him have a drink. And after 20 checks, he couldn't make it home that night. But he paid everybody off, and that tells you something about him. He wasn't afraid to be a farmer on the muck back in the 50s. Like Neil was saying, I mean, you had to be ready to take some chances, be innovative, be smart. He made it work, but he paid everybody off. And, he came back, made his crop, and when he paid everybody off, that was something. He used to tell that story with so much pride. Because not the fact that he was successful, but the fact that he was a man of his word, and he did what he told him he was going to do. He went on. At that time, he was growing all kinds of crops. Neil started in '61. I was born in '61, so I didn't get first hand. I tell you what, I hear some stories about those guys. Rex was your dad, and all the Hoopers and the Lust Boys, and the stuff they used to do. We were so tame. I know I couldn't keep up with my father-in-law on my best day. They worked hard, they played hard. Club Rudo was, I heard a lot. I've been to Club Rudo in Mount Dora from times. I didn't have quite the same amount of stories you guys had. Billy used to tell a story about Grant Luss. They were at Club Rudo one night, and Grant, they would stay too long, and Grant got up, there was blood everywhere. He'd been sitting on the busted glass all night, never knew it. His pants were soaked with blood. The next time, these stories, I wasn't prepared to say anything tonight. I was just going to answer questions. But I know when they would they'd leave everybody probably knows about Zellwood Country Club. And all the parties, you know, they formed that back in, I think they built it in the 60s.
Yeah,
And,
the 70s, yeah.
Yeah, and it was right on the railroad tracks. And there'd be a sponsor. They'd do it from like November through June, and once a month, and there'd be a sponsor who put it on, and all the farmers would come around. And it kind of got out of hand. Those guys used to have a habit of, railroad track ran right next to the clubhouse. So they would let air out of the tires, get up on the railroad tracks, and just go driving down. I'll tell you what, man, you'd be in jail for everything they did. They'd go out drinking. Norman Dickerson, I think he was the designated driver. He had no station wagon or something. Billy would tell the story. And then, it was Norman Dickerson's station wagon, but Paul Wolf, I think, was the designated driver. And they filled the back. They went up to the ice house where they used to fill the trucks up with ice, snow ice, and they put all the drinks in the back and they just filled that station wagon up with ice. Well, the next day that thing was full of ice, full of water. So Norman took out a good shot a hole in the bottom of it, drained it out. So, that's the kind of stuff they did. I mean, you can't make it up. It's they had a good time. And the best story about Billy, they on Lust Strip, everybody did the flying. The Lust brothers did the dusting for everybody. I don't even know what year it was, but it's probably in the 70s or early 80s. But Billy had a station wagon, and I think he was the last farmer to actually get a pickup truck. He always used to drive a car. But, he had a station wagon. After a muck supper, he had too much. And the story was, he used to tame it down, but the story was he tried to take off in the station wagon. And so he was heading south on Lust Strip, realized there was a big canal on the end, slammed on the brakes, went into the ditch. So he scrambled around. They got a wrecker. I think it was Frank. It was your dad that helped him out.
Oh, Dad, Jeff Bogue.
Jeff Cook, who should be here. Jeff and Frank Scott got the wrecker. They drug it up to the highland on the edge of the muck in the woods to hide it. Billy, he wouldn't tell nobody. So the next day, I think it was Mac McGee or somebody.
You dropped us.
One of the crop dusters, might have been for, I don't remember who it was, but anyway, it had radios in the blind. And so Mac, I guess it was Mac, was flying. And so he pulled up over, he caught a glimpse, saw that station wagon. He circled around a few times. And when you call a radio, everybody can hear it because everybody, there's 20 radios on that system. He says, whatever the number one, Billy, you there? Unit one, finally comes up and says, hey man, your station wagon's in the woods up here. Billy wouldn't answer. He couldn't, that's just where it was. But I got there, I married Lisa in '83, and he taught me how to be a lawyer. So I came onto the farm, and best thing that I ever did. I was 22, and the best place in the world to be. After a year, I ran his carrot packing house for a few years. And that's when you're 24, running a packing house, you grow up fast. It was pretty cool. But Billy was the best at letting somebody learn by his mistakes. He didn't babysit you, didn't watch you over your shoulder. You passed, you failed. And he wouldn't, if you failed, you learned a lesson, you went on about it. And if you did good, he'd tap you on the shoulder a little bit. He wouldn't brag about you too much, but he always expected that. When the muck did sell, and there's a lot of stories in between now and then, the other days, but when the muck sold, that I know Billy, he kind of, as I did, I was only 37 when the muck sold. But he lost a part of himself. That was his sense of identity, like it was with everybody at this table. We used to see each other every day. Everybody on this table. Every time we pass by it on the truck, it would be 100 times a day. You get the finger, not that, not bad for you, just get the finger. Hello. And you pass by, you have to roll your windows up because you're going to get dusted. But everybody you hung out with was on the Muck. You were with them 60, 70 hours a week. It was a sense of community that it's hard to explain. Since then, our families, we farmed down in Claremont, south of Claremont, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it was weird for many years because I'd be farming and not see anybody for weeks, and it was just so different because the Muck was a farm, but it was like I said, it was a community, and I miss it. But I mean, you move on. I missed it mainly for my kids. The last day, like the last truck, I remember taking my kids, my two sons. I've got a daughter as well, but my two sons, Michael and Kyle, they were probably 12 and 8. We'd start the harvesters at 5 in the morning, and we were in the miller blocks last day. And I got one of those big old box video recorders still on my shoulder, trying to tape it. But we filmed the last morning. The kids were on the corn harvester. They remember it to this day. Anyway, we all missed the Muck. It was a part of our lives that we're very proud of, and I wish Billy was here to see this gathering, because he would have loved it. So trust me, he would have been telling some stories, and you would have loved Billy Long again. So anyway, there you go, Hank.
Well, obviously, we're the longest guy. Billy is the longest guy, so that's where we come from. And I can relate to a lot of the stories. I was the one that pulled the radio out of the car the next morning after it was wrecked to go in the new car. And I was one of the guys that drove the corn harvester at 4:30 in the morning. And when I was in high school, I worked the corn line. A little older than David, but I remember a lot of that stuff even though we were on the sand. And Dad came down here in '63 because they were neighbors in Virginia, grew up together, both families, and asked Dad to come down here and try his hand at the sand farm. And I remember, even though I was very young, I think I was 6 years old when I came down here, pulling in there where the barn is today, and that same barn is still there. That first barn is still there with all the rusty metal and all that stuff.
Kind of looks like
Yeah, it was rough. About to fall down. But anyway, I remember the dirt road, and just nothing but pine trees and palmettos. And those guys got out there. I think they had two A John Deeres, and they were from up north because they had heaters on them. I never could figure that out. But they cleared that land with those two John Deere A's, and started out with 40 acres. And being farming in Virginia, Dad farmed with his father and grew pickles up there, pickled cucumbers, which we still grow today. And that was one of the main crops we started out with, still grow today. And I remember planting those things with that John Deere A and grading them right there in that old rusty barn. And we put them in these nostalgic baskets with the ears on it, and sent every one of them to New York market, Bronx market, to Rosenthal and Klein. And crazy as it sounds, we're back packing those things in those same baskets today. It's a novelty. We're packing them in a nostalgic basket because that's what people want. They pay big money, or pay more money, not big money. They pay more money for that basket than they will a regular old crate. But that's kind of the history. They started out with Dad. Billy started out with 40 acres out there, and they grew it and kept clearing land and buying land. Ended up with about 1,200 acres we got now, and obviously still farming it. And you talk about Dave talked about the community. We all work together. And '98 when the farms left, it was tough on us. We had to back up, start over, reorganize, do things different. You know, change our tactics, because we lost our fellowship out there. People helped each other. It was a great time, and somehow we struggled through it. We're still there. We're having not the greatest time, but we're still farming. And like Neil says, you got to keep changing every year. You got to keep changing. You got to stay up with times. You got to make things work. You got to come up with new ideas. One thing, along with the Scots did back in the mid-90s, we started a farm down in Stewart, and we were going to grow pickles because at the time, Clausen wanted to extend their season with us. This was back before they were buying everything out, bringing everything from Mexico and dumping everything in Mexico so cheap from Mexico. So we started that farm down there and turned it over to a cousin, John, who's running it down there now and done an excellent job with that farm. But that's just the way things grow, just the way you progress, you try new things, you diversify, like Neil said, and make things work. And he's got a hell of a farm down there growing potatoes, red potatoes, which we grew for years up here, and doing a great job. But we miss the muck suppers, of course. Those crazy muck suppers where play cards all night long, and just have a good time, a good fellowship, and you know, you share ideas, and you learn what everybody else is doing. It was a great time, but we tried some sand suppers, and we had some good times. There's some pictures back there on the table of some of the times we did that, and they worked out good. Unfortunately, it wasn't the same. We couldn't get people to come like they did back in the day, but we still had some good times. And well, on the way over here tonight, of course, thinking about, Margie goes, you got to bring something that you know, reminds everybody of the Muck and what it was. And I brought this one thing that's a real treasure for me. Buster Williams was our salesman. He was one of the first guys Dad ever met when he came to Florida. And he sold all our stuff for many years until he retired. And this is a card that he had that tells about the corn and who to call. And it says on here, Buster, I'm the only one that answers this phone. And it says on here, you got to give me plenty of nuts, but we got plenty of corn. And it's a neat little card that I keep. But Buster was one of the great salesmen of all times out there on that Muck, and he knew so much stuff, and he was a character now. Dad came down here, similar to what y'all were talking about earlier. He came down here with $500 in his pocket, and a 58 Chevy, 2.5 ton truck, a spray rig, a wooden spray rig, and a 300 farm haul tractor. That's all he had. And Buster told him, he says, first thing you need to do is you can go down to the First National Bank, you need to borrow $1,000. And he says, you know, you need to go buy Gator season tickets. and thank God Dad did that, because he still got those tickets. But he said, Buster, I don't need any money. I got $500 in my pocket. He said, son, you go borrow that money. He said, you get your credit set up, and he said, you can do anything you want to from now on out. And that's what Dad did. And that's what got him going. So he's still with First National Bank. He's not here tonight. He had a stroke 2 Christmas ago. And he's alive, but he's not 100%. But if anybody wants to stop by and visit with him, please do. Thanks, guys.